Hey everybody, just wanted to take a second, make a video. It just kind of struck me here. I see a lot of people saying about their receptacles in their house burning up. I saw another post tonight, and it's amazing to hear like how a lot of people don't realize like what makes these fail. Generally, it's not the receptacle itself, a manufacturing issue, something like that, that's causing it to fail. It's usually overloading or something in the circuit that's not correct. So I wanted to make a video, try to explain, kind of break it down to layman's terms, so you can understand. It's really simple, actually, if somebody explains it to you. As most of my friends, everybody know, I work for Scott Electric. You can see in the background. So I sell this stuff for a living. I've installed this stuff. I know how it works. So basically, a circuit in your house, the receptacle, goes back to a breaker. So on your receptacles, if you look on the receptacle, down on usually on the ear, it'll actually say what the amperage is, what the voltage is. So the amperage, obviously you want to match up to your breaker in your panel in your house. So here's a breaker. This one's a 15 amp breaker. You can see the 15 on the end of it, and then this one is a 20 amp breaker. So what this basically is saying is this one can handle 15 amps of current, this one can hold 20 amps of current. But in your circuit, everything has to match going into your circuit. So this is a 15 amp duplex receptacle, 125 volt. So this can go in your box in your wall, but you need to make sure it's on a 15 amp breaker so it's not overprotected, okay? And your wire in your wall is actually sized to your receptacles and to your breakers. So 14 gauge wire, and this is a Romex wire. 14 gauge wire is rated for 15 amp. If you don't have 14 gauge wire, or if you have 12 gauge wire, 12 gauge wire is rated for 20 amps. So if you can see where I'm going here with this. So if your breaker's 15 amp, your wire has to be 15 amp, which is a 14 gauge, and then your receptacle has to be 15 amp. Okay, so if you have 12 gauge wire in your wall, then you would want to grab a 20 amp breaker. Make sure it's on a 20 amp breaker. You have your 20 amp rated wire, and then you would want a 20 amp receptacle. So what happens if one of these does not match? Okay, so let's say you have a 15 amp breaker, you have 15 amp wire, your receptacle is 20 amp. Okay, so now in the system, your receptacle is now the strongest thing in the circuit. So this is not going to fail. If you overload the circuit, if you plug something in that's rated for 20 amp, because this is a 20 amp receptacle, but you only have 15 amp wire and 15 amp breaker, it should trip the breaker. If it doesn't, so either your breaker can fail or your wire can fail. And honestly, worst case scenario is your wire fails in the wall because it's inside your walls. So if your wire fails, it's going to catch on fire. This causes fire. So best case scenario is your receptacle fails and you see it, or your breaker trips. So some older brands of panels were known to not trip, and they are still out there. The brands are still out there. The well-known brands, the Siemens, Leviton, Square D, GE, all those brands. Not saying they don't have issues, any of them, but they're not known for these issues like Federal Pacific. So, anyways, back to your circuit. So your receptacle is your strongest item in that circuit. So now, say you have a 15 amp receptacle, you have 20 amp wire, and a 20 amp breaker. Now your receptacle is your weakest link in your circuit. So it's your breaker and your wire are going to handle a lot more than what the receptacle is rated for. So that's when you end up having an issue. People plug air conditioners and electric heaters, things like that draw a lot of current. And what ends up happening is you burn up your 15 amp receptacle. And that's what you see. I see it on Facebook all the time. People are posting this stuff. The other thing that tends to happen with these is loose connections. If somebody that doesn't know what they're doing installs a receptacle and doesn't get a good connection, they'll loose. They will arc, and that arcing can burn up your receptacle. So basically, to summarize all this, you want everything in your circuit to match. So your breaker, your wire, and your receptacle all need to be rated the same, so you don't have a weak link in your circuit. Then hopefully, if you have your breaker, your wire, and your receptacle all rated correctly, if you overload the circuit with an air conditioner or something that's drawing a lot of power, your breaker should trip. Okay, if your breaker doesn't trip, then you're kind of out of luck there. But again, your breaker, your wire, your receptacle all have to be rated the same, and then you should not have those issues unless you overload the circuit and your breaker doesn't trip. If your breaker doesn't trip, your wire can burn in the wall, or your receptacle can burn up. So if you have one of those older systems that are known for the breaker not tripping, I would recommend getting it upgraded. That being said, I hope this helps people understand that electrical circuits aren't that hard to understand. It's almost like working on a car, where you have pieces that kind of go together to make like your fuel system work or your exhaust system work. So, but electrical, it's pretty simple. So breaker, wire, and your receptacle have to match, and you should be good. So I hope this was informative. I hope this helped. And another thing, just in newer house wiring, white generally is your 14 gauge, yellow is your 12 gauge, which is 20 amp, orange is usually your 10 gauge, which is 30 amp rated. So in the older homes, you might have stuff in the metal, like tubing. We call it BX wire. New term today is MCI, metal clad. But the old wiring didn't actually have a dedicated ground wire in the sheathing. So that's something else that you should probably look at. If you have that in your house, you might want to eventually get that upgraded. But anyways, I hope this was informative. Try not to be so long-winded if I make any more of these videos. So check it out, and hit me up if you need anything electrical. I know a ton of electricians that can help you out. So thanks everybody, have a great day, and God bless.